If, like me, you're a sordid View to a Kill apologist, then one of the highlights of that film for you is probably the wonderful chemistry between Roger Moore and Patrick Macnee. Macnee's Tibbet is often highly rated by Bond fans as one of 007's best ally characters, and a large part of that is down to the fun banter and natural, lightly comedic interplay between the two actors. Every time I watch A View to a Kill, I breathe a heavy sigh when Tibbet drives his rolls into the car wash only to be throttled to death before the vehicle even reaches the rinsing stage, because I could happily sit through an entire film of Moore and Macnee together on screen. These two actors could jointly read through the phone book together and I'd be enthralled. Though Sherlock Holmes in New York really does test that theory to its limits. Good evening, Mr. Holmes fans. Yes, Roger Moore as Sherlock Holmes and Patrick Macnee as Watson. I can't believe it has taken me this long to get around to actually seeing this film. The film was released in October 1976 on television, NBC no less. Because yeah, this is a made-for-television movie. Though with a cast like this, you could have fooled me. I mean, Moore and Macnee are enough, but they're joined by Charlotte Rampling as Irene Adler and John Huston as Moriarty. I mean, this is pretty phenomenal stuff. This is quite the quartet of leads, even if about half of them are maybe a bit miscast, if I'm being honest, but more on that after a quick summary of the plot. As the title suggests, Holmes and Watson travel to New York after a cryptic threat from arch-nemesis Professor Moriarty leads them to Irene Adler, a former flame of Holmes whose son is kidnapped by the villain and used to threaten Holmes into keeping his nose out of a scheme by which Moriarty plans to steal a bunch of gold bars from the New York bank. So it's up to Holmes to locate Adler's son, rescue the boy, and figure out how Moriarty was seemingly able to make away with so many tons of gold so quickly without anyone noticing. The film was written by Alvin Sapinsley, and as far as I'm aware, I don't believe that this screenplay is based on any pre-existing, Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes story, which probably goes some way to explaining why there's not really much of a mystery in this Sherlock Holmes story. I mean, yeah, Holmes has to figure out how the gold was stolen and where the boy is, but Moriarty here is really played more like a Bond villain, and I wouldn't necessarily call Goldfinger, for instance, a mystery film because it takes over an hour of screen time for Bond to figure out what the villain is up to. There's also just not all that much sleuthing going on here. Look, I'm by no means a Sherlock Holmes expert. I've read a handful of the stories, I've seen a bunch of the movies based on the character, Basil Rathbone, Robert Downey Jr., and the TV version with Benedict Cumberbatch being the ones that stick in my mind the most, but even with my limited understanding of the character, very top level, I'm still kind of used to Holmes doing a bit more, investigating? Maybe a part of this is down to the fact that this was made for TV, and by virtue, it does have a smaller scale to its production. And, honestly, if you'd have told me that this screenplay was an adaptation of a stage play, I'd have believed you. This is a very, very talky film, and the action is largely confined to a series of hotel rooms. And as such, it means that Holmes and Watson aren't exactly, out in the field, finding clues, interviewing suspects, or what have you. I mean, yes, they are out of their comfort zones by being in New York, but the location has little to do with anything story-wise. I mean, this could have easily been set in London, and I'm assuming that it's just set in the US because that's where the production was taking place, and it was easier to dress the sets for a 1901 New York than a 1901 London. The mysteries, for what they are solved by Holmes just kind of by him just, talking himself around to a logical conclusion, or there's one point where he just has a good long think, and, I mean, Moriarty's whole gold-stealing heist happens off-camera. We just have characters talking about how a bunch of gold was stolen, and we hear Holmes's explanation for how he did it, and it's all very clear, but just not very exciting. There isn't much flair to this direction. I'm under no illusion that this film is anything other than just deeply, and I mean deeply, dull, but it's Roger Moore as Sherlock Holmes and Patrick Macnee as Watson, so obviously I would rather watch this than 92% of the other films out there. I adore seeing these two together, and I think that their natural chemistry is the sole reason why I'm quite happy to sit through these over 100 minutes. There are some scenes where they arrive in New York that are probably my favourite scenes of the whole film. It's fish out of water stuff, and Watson is out of his element with the attitudes of the New Yorkers and whatnot, and Moore is doing his classic unflappably cool thing, and they have some banter and some funny moments. I do love all of this stuff.
Watson, see if you can purchase 2 tickets for this evening's performance. I will endeavour to find out what I can inside.
Yes, of course, Holmes. I'll join you when I've done. Oh, excuse me, is this a queue?
I think Macnee as Watson is a delight, and he fits into the role perfectly. It's hardly a new take on the character, he's very much in the Nigel Bruce vein, but I found him to be just an absolute pleasure to watch. Moore as Holmes, though, I think is, it's tough because I don't feel like Moore is doing much different to his typical, Moore screen hero persona, and I never feel like I lose him in the part. And now, for me, as a diehard Roger Moore fan, that's not necessarily a bad thing. As I say, I could happily watch the man in anything, but I can't imagine that he's ranking highly on anyone's top 10 Sherlock Holmes lists anytime soon. He seems to have the most fun during the scenes where he gets to wear some prosthetics and do an accent as Holmes goes undercover.
Buonasera, signorina. Che piacere. I once had the great honor of appearing on the same bill with your most esteemed father. My name is Sherlock Holmes. If you value your life and freedom, you'll invite me to your room at once.
Otherwise, I feel like he doesn't veer all that much from his typical dashing hero thing. I mean, he's certainly more serious, I guess, than you would maybe expect from Moore. He's not doing this terribly tongue-in-cheek, I don't think, but there are still some nice wry moments here and there, usually when he's reacting to Watson's bumblings.
So, it's their word for underground. Now that he mentions it, I recall reading of its construction. New York's first, I understand.
Do you mean to tell me they don't have an underground railway here? It stands to reason, doesn't it? They don't have hansoms.
I'm not enough of a Sherlock Holmes aficionado to make grand claims about whether Moore is truly right for this part or what have you, but I can tell you that for me, from my perspective, this didn't even really feel like a Sherlock Holmes story at times, because I never felt like the lead character was embodying the traits and personality that I would typically associate with the man. Also, on the I'm not sure it's good casting, but I kind of enjoy it anyway front, is John Huston as Moriarty, who presumably had it in his contract that he was going to be sat down for almost all of the shoot, and that the caterers were going to provide the production with nothing but ham. He is clearly having an absolute ball playing the villainous mastermind part and delivers almost every line like he's savouring every utterance.
It will go forward. It will take place. And, Mr. Holmes, it will take place before your very eyes, and you'll be powerless to prevent it. The world will gape at its immensity.
Gaping at something immense? Don't threaten me with a good time, Mr. Moriarty. By the way, I love how, again, TV production, they have a much more limited amount of resources, presumably, but I love how they wrote themselves around this particular bit of set reuse. So, in the opening prologue sequence, it's set in London, and Holmes appears at Moriarty's lair, and it's a whole scene set in the place, and Moriarty has some traps and whatever, and Holmes rumbles the villain in that first scene and leaves. And then when we see Moriarty later in New York, he's in the same damn room, and no point is initially made about the fact that this exact room somehow has transported from the docks of the Thames to New York. And I'm thinking, okay, so maybe the opening was a misdirect, and it's going to be revealed that what we actually saw was like the end of the movie, or something like that. I was expecting there to be some kind of subversive reason for this, but no, when it's time for the climax, they throw in one of the most blatantly expository lines I've ever heard to explain how Moriarty has two identical rooms on both sides of the Atlantic.
And a little touch of London, I see. You must really feel at home in this chamber of horrors to duplicate it wherever you go.
I mean, were they really so tight on money that they couldn't even change the wallpaper? I guess if I were to be kind, like, rather than just budgetary requirements, I guess it works to have the same setting so that they can set up that Moriarty has all of these traps at the start of the thing, and then they come back for the climax. But I don't know why he's so proud of these traps. I mean, most of them Holmes doesn't even need to dodge. He just stands there and they happen around him. Yeah, great. Great security you've got here, Moriarty. And then we have Charlotte Rampling as Irene Adler, who is sadly not given all that much to do. I love this actress, and it's interesting to note that just 2 years prior, she played the love interest of another Bond actor in Zardoz. Adler here is largely confined to a single room, worrying about her captive son, who is coincidentally played by Roger Moore's real-life son, Geoffrey. There's a bit of romantic tension between Holmes and Adler. There's an implication that her son is also Holmes's son, but I can't say that I care either way. Adler really isn't given anything to do, and it's such a shame, because again, I love this actress, and I'd have loved to have seen her a bit more involved. There's an attempt at an action-packed climax as Moriarty forgoes any intricate scheming and just, like, kidnaps the boy again in broad moonlight, and there's a chase involving the horse-drawn carriages, which is something, I guess. I just want to touch on the audio commentary for the film, by the way. It's Roger Moore in conversation with the moderator, and while it's always a delight to hear Roger musing at random, I was very surprised at just how little detail on this film was contained within the commentary, and at around the hour mark, it literally just becomes Roger listing some of his favourite TV shows.
I find we watch all the comedy shows.
All right.
We love Catherine Tate, but Madame Bouquet and Keeping Up Appearances. I enjoy One Foot in the Grave. So we get all these reruns, and Only Fools and Horses, which we like very much. There's a wealth of material out there in television there.
Yeah.
I had hoped to hear a bit more about the production and how the film was released in countries outside of the US. The Blu-ray that I have features an alternative theatrical aspect ratio presentation, which basically crops the image down to a widescreen format as opposed to full frame as it will have been broadcast. And I don't know if that implies that the film received a theatrical release somewhere in the world, kind of like how Steven Spielberg's Duel was a TV movie of the week in the US, but it played in cinemas outside of the country. If you have any memories of seeing Sherlock Holmes in New York on the big screen, then do let me know in the comments section below. I'd really love to know if this ever had a theatrical release. The other big question that I came out of this wondering was whether there were any plans for sequels to this, and that question at least gets an answer, if somewhat an abrupt one from Moore on the commentary.
Was there a chance that there might have been a sequel? Moriarty Gets Away. Was there a chance that they were going to do another one?
I don't know. We never discussed it.
Pleasure, Holmes.
I've heard many a Roger Moore audio commentary track, and the guy is always super self-deprecating about his memory, and I'm certainly not dinging him for not having a day-by-day account ready to go about the making of this film. He's very upfront on commentary tracks. He starts most of them off by saying, like, look, I made these films a long time ago, I'm an old guy now, and I might not necessarily remember absolutely everything about this shoot. But the fact that he spends so much of this particular track talking about other movies and series that he made, I mean, it's on like a next level. It kind of suggests to me that Sherlock Holmes in New York was about as memorable to film as it is to watch. This is definitely one to file under the for more aficionados only bracket, or perhaps even more specifically, A View to a Kill aficionados only. Moore and Macnee on screen together are a never-ending delight, and every scene that they're in together is one worth watching as far as I'm concerned. But even they can't save the overall package, which is just very dull. I don't know how else to best describe this. I mean, it doesn't really move the dial for me plot-wise. It's all very talky. It's lacking an intriguing central mystery, the kind of thing that you would expect from a Sherlock Holmes story. Though, you know what, for all of my comments about the penny pinching, the production values are actually pretty good for what it is, and I very much enjoyed the musical score, but yeah, it's hard to recommend this to anyone other than a Roger Moore, Patrick Macnee fan, and to be honest, if you're watching this channel, you probably are one of those, so, I mean, hey, go nuts, maybe this movie is for you, but don't blame me if you snooze off periodically only to be awoken by the occasional Irish bellowing.
Holmes.
Let me know in the comments below if I've been too harsh on this one, as well as your own thoughts on the film. And also below, you can click the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay super up-to-date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, Mr. Holmes fans, so long for now.